Hi, this is a new talk on Prehistoric Aldbourne. This was to be a talk in June at the June members meeting, but that now doesn't look possible, so here we go, Prehistoric Aldbourne. This is obviously, we can't write an absolute history, but there's a lot more known about prehistoric times now than used to be, so I just thought I'd fill you in on some of what we know about that, what's interesting, what's new, and where Aldbourne fits into some of that. So if we outline the different ages, first of all, we've got the Paleolithic, which is the Old Stone Age, Ice Age, Mesolithic, Middle Stone Age, Neolithic is Middle Bronze Age. So first thing to say, there's no instant changeover between the different ages. The ages are really describing technologies, and it's not that one technology stopped being used and then another started. So, you can get Bronze Age flint scrapers. Bronze is still being used now. Dates in one place don't necessarily apply to anywhere else in the world, and probably even not entirely accurately across the UK. Names like Paleolithic and Mesolithic are used now partly because Stone Age has become a bit of a pejorative term. We talk about bombing people back to Stone Age. It shouldn't really be seen as a judgment. There's plenty of places in the world where, until very recently, people have technically been in a sort of local Stone Age. It's not to pass a judgment on them. And even, is it terribly right in global terms to regard it as a linear thing that all places should or would follow? So there's a bit of caution about how we use the names there. Firstly, human history is exceedingly long. We've been evolved for about 3.3 million years. There's been multiple warm periods and ice ages in that time. The end of the last ice age was about 11,500 years ago. That's 99% of human history. That's slightly scary. So 99% of human history was before the last ice age, and we don't know very much about it. The first humans that we know of in the UK were at Haysborough. It doesn't look like it's pronounced Haysborough, but it is, in Norfolk, 800,000 years ago. The guy there is looking at the footprints because the footprints were exposed in what had been mud that's now being exposed on the coast. Obviously long enough to have been buried geologically and then re-exposed. So not easy to find evidence of human activity from that far back. So in the last warm period in the Thames Valley and around here, you would have seen some of these animals. Isn't it sort of crazy? So the Earth goes through cycles of warm and cold. If you want to really understand why, they're called Milankovitch cycles. And it's all to do with how the Earth spins and how the Earth orbits the Sun and how that all interacts. Each one, how the spin can change, cool, warm. The orbit changes, so then you get, sometimes things interfere, sometimes they make each change more pronounced. Anyway, I've never quite got my head around it, but Milankovitch cycles, if you really want to understand. But those animals would have been seen around here. Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age. So Devizes Museum has various stone tools. I was taken down into their basement one time, and they had a box of what didn't look even this good. That picture, not as good as that, flints. And you picked one up and you found it fitted your hand perfectly. They're relatively crude tools, anywhere between 3 and 25 centimetres. There's been some found at Liddington Castle and over 2,000 at Little Knoll Farm in Bedwyn. The picture here is of tools found off the coast of Norfolk. So these were probably created during the last ice age by Neanderthals. Neanderthals being a slightly earlier version of humans. There's a whole load of discussion you can look up about interactions between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalis. So, in the last ice age, we've got woolly mammoth being at Bedwyn. So probably here, the glaciers didn't reach us here, but most evidence of human occupation would have been removed. There's no evidence of humans really being around much right here in the ice age. Imagine the countryside would have been pretty much like Siberia, cold permafrost, if not quite under snow all the time. Certainly very limited by the weather. But in Ice Age Wiltshire, we've got all of these animals are known to be here. So it's not that it wasn't occupied. That enormous beast at the top is an aurochs, or what they reckon an aurochs would look like, because obviously we don't have any photos. It's the sort of original cattle. They were much bigger, much heavier, and you'd have needed some nerve to hunt them, but people did. Woolly rhino, that's a bit of a scary beast as well. A lot of the others are obviously still existing in the world now. Certainly there is some way, nationally, there's evidence of reindeer being hunted at this sort of period. And the last ice age ended at about 11,700 years before present. So Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age. It's the end of the ice. The climate slowly warms. We get rising sea levels. Obviously, during the ice age, an awful lot of water was tied up in ice. So the map on the right, you can see how far the land extended at 16,000 BC because of the ice. Even at 8,000 BC is the middle green colour, so you can see it's sort of still well connected all the way over to Denmark. 7,000 BC, you've still got a lot. So it takes a while for the ice to actually melt. The woods start developing. We get horses, beaver, and gradual immigration by people walking over. About 7,000 BC, so we've got settlement all over the place. The tools become more sophisticated. The flint, plenty of work flints found in the Swindon area. Most evidence of occupation is from flint because they'd have used flint wood, skins, whatever, but most of that doesn't survive. Initially, it was all hunter-gatherer society, so the people would have been moving around rather than settling in one place. The picture there is of a flint scraper found in Aldbourne. That's going to be a bit, your thumb would fit over most of that. At this time, Mesolithic sites tend to concentrate around springs, so that would suggest that probably, there'd have at least been coming to Aldbourne some of the year. We know, of course, that the water levels would have probably been a lot higher. You wouldn't have been abstracting anywhere near the amount of water that the Thames Valley water abstract per day. So, yeah, we'd have probably had a spring. Stone axes found in Wiltshire been found to come from as far as Cornwall. That's a stone axe discovered here, so that's quite cool. But you notice it's still relatively crude, although I presume that one's had a bit of a rough life as well. So, how would people have lived? That's a reconstruction of a Neolithic house up north. So a little round house, timber support, a bit like a sort of teepee in shape, but maybe made out of turf. They might use skin as well. So, yeah, we've got finds of Mesolithic flints up near Four Barrows, implements and blades. So, you know, the land around here was definitely still occupied. The houses like that would have probably been fashioned using hazel or willow poles. Neolithic, of course, named after the flint. So microliths tend to come in now. We found microliths both in Aldbourne and over at Aldbourne. I found one over at Aldbourne, so they can be really tiny little flints, but very finely knapped. Very skilled work, and they'd have probably been mounted into the edge of something using resin or something like that to provide a cutting edge, but without the need for a great big flint, which probably made, you know, arrows lighter, so might have given them for a longer distance. So the land was becoming warmer, and the treeless plains were being populated by birch and pine woodland. We're starting to see the wildwood developing, and that keeps on going. By about 6,000 BC, that process was complete. We'd have had pretty much forest as we would recognise it now. You know, some non-native trees here now that wouldn't have been there. But, the earliest radiocarbon dates for Neolithic settlements in Britain cluster around 4,500 years BC. So that's proper settlements. So that is an early Neolithic axe found at Canterbury, but made from stone in the Italian Alps. So, you know, don't think that just because folk were living in very small round huts that there wasn't movement around. Ground axe heads have also been found just to the north of Aldbourne, virtually rectangular in shape, about 9 centimetres long, 5 centimetres wide. Neolithic debris also been found down at Whittenditch. So, you know, definite occupation around Aldbourne there. But I think that's a beautiful axe. So this is a map of axe heads that have been found, obviously around Avebury and that area. You've got an amazing concentration. Of course, this might be somewhat skewed by where people are looking. So, you know, you'll only find axes where you're looking. But around Aldbourne, in the upper right, there's a couple of 2 small groups of dots and 2 red dots together. The black dots are the axes. So there's a real group there and slightly further up the valley. So, you know, Aldbourne's definitely, in a sense, existing back in Neolithic times. So now we can do DNA research on Neolithic humans. We now know that the Neolithic inhabitants were descended from populations originating in Anatolia that moved first to Spain before heading north, and they reached here, UK, Britain at about 4000 BC. And that was part of a massive expansion of people coming out of Anatolia, starting in about 6000 BC, that introduced farming to Europe. And we can tell from the DNA that they largely replaced the previous humans. This isn't the first time that's happened. So in the Neolithic, we get farming coming in, as we just mentioned. Slowly comes in over 1,000 years or so. We see grain and querns to grind the grain coming in. And with farming, you obviously get permanent settlement. Well, there's still been some movement, but that was reducing. The environment now is a mixture of downland, grass and woodland. So, as we just mentioned as well, the water levels would have still been much higher. We're known at this point to have cattle, sheep, goats, pig, dogs, but at the same time we also still had deer and aurochs being hunted. Charred hazelnut shells have been found, and we also down at Salisbury Plain get evidence for oysters being eaten. So and during this time the land would have started to be cleared of stone, so that you could plough. The grey weathers that are shown here, that don't exist in very many places around the country now, would have been probably far more common in the landscape than they are now. So what did the buildings look like? Well, here you go. What did they look like? Did you expect them to look like this? We get, after a while, rectangular buildings arriving. And this isn't just one fluke. This one's been marked out so you can see. There's another one that's down at near Datchet, so not too far away. Possibly had walls made of split planks. Obviously the evidence for walls is a bit trickier to establish. But down at Butser Ancient Farm, they are working on reconstruction with Wessex Archaeology right now. So if you follow Wessex's newsfeed, you'll occasionally see photos of this building as it's being built. So not exactly, construction houses isn't a linear thing of round goes to square. It becomes more complex. It varies over time, interestingly. Pottery, we're seeing pottery by about 3000 BC, grooved ware, and that's a pot being found at Datchet, and it's almost complete and quite sophisticated. It's not just a crude round pot, it's even got a handle. So probably we'd have been surprised by how well people were living. So we can't talk about this period without mentioning some of the other big things going on. We've got Stonehenge. First construction starts about 3,750 years before Christ, running through to about 3,300, with the Saracens going up at 2,600 BC. Dorrington Walls nearby seems to have been a bit of a gathering place. There wasn't much occupation itself happening at Stonehenge. but Darrington Wall seems to have been a bit of a party venue. So there's plenty of animal bones found there. Some of the pigs have come for as far away as northeast Scotland. Well, if you tried killing your pig in northeast Scotland and then lugging the pork all the way down to Stonehenge, I think you'd probably find it was fairly rancid by the time you got here. So the most likely explanation is that someone's managed to actually herd pigs all the way from Scotland. And pigs aren't the most easy animals to herd, so it's like, how on earth did they manage to do that? You know, people were coming from across the UK to Darrington Walls, so it wasn't just even we can't really talk about Wiltshire at this period, but this wasn't a local thing that was happening, it was a national gathering. So, we should talk about death and burial. Long barrows. This is West Kennet long barrow. They can be about 100 metre long, with the roof chain of the chamber being over 2 metres high. That's quite a construction. The actual internal chamber being maybe 10 metres long. And you know, over time the patterns changed, so stone circles and henges become more popular about 3,500 to 3,000 BC. At this point, the population would have been about 250,000 at about 2000 BC. So not very many people. So, you know, given how few people were, they managed to make what they did do was quite very impressive. Also about this sort of period, you get Windmill Hill causewayed enclosure. That's possibly what it would look like. It's not defensive. No use for that. There's too many entry points. So symbolically separate. Silbury Hill, we all know, that was started about 2700 BC and took several million man-hours to complete, which I think makes it fairly likely that folk from Aldbourne were probably involved. You'd have been sucking in manpower from quite a local area, because it wasn't just two guys that Avery deciding they needed a garden feature or whatever. And Avebury, a Neolithic henge monument, originally had about 100 stones. Pottery suggests it was in use from 2600 through to 1600 BC, linked by a causeway that had another 100 plus stones. The causeway running for about a kilometre and a half to or from the sanctuary. So another massive amount of effort. And you know, we look at that and think, oh, that's impressive, that must have taken some effort. But the picture on the right shows you how deep that ditch was. What we see now is nothing like what it was. So there you've got guys digging, so you've got about 4 guys deep. So what's that? 20 plus feet deeper than it is. We see it now. Probably 25. 1.5 million man-hours to dig it. So once again, very likely that people from around here would have been involved, because you'd have needed an awful lot of people to get that done in any sensible timescale. So at the centre of Avebury, this is an archaeological drawing. You can see the loop of stones. It seems to have been a square house. at the centre, which is sort of quite interesting. So we'd already seen Neolithic square houses, but somehow some of the monuments develop around these houses. So was it a a respected person somehow gets commemorated? I think that, or was it a temple? Unfortunately, some of these things we're not going to know. Also Neolithic. This is not the world's most impressive stone circle. This is down at Cote, and you can see Liddington Hill in the background there. But it was about 69 metre diameter stone circle, possibly about 30 stones. But now, we'd barely recognise it as something. So towards the end of the Neolithic and into the Bronze Age, we get the beaker culture arriving. And it's not just about pottery, I should say pottery, not pattery, but metal as well. And still we've got long distance travel going on. The Amesbury Archer from this period was from Austria or Switzerland, but then had travelled to Cumbria or Wales. We can tell that from isotopes in teeth. And we've still got stone being transported from Europe to Wiltshire, Milminol, and scattered sherds of beaker pottery being found up and around Fort Barrow. So we've still got occupation from this period in Aldbourne. So there was long debate over, was it just a culture that was spreading, or was it people that were spreading? So pots versus people, was it just a fashion that spread? So up till now you couldn't really tell, but now we've got DNA. So 155 samples were taken, ranging from 6,000 to 3,000 years ago. And the geneticists have looked at it and found that the DNA before and after is very different. So they reckon almost 90% of Britons were replaced by the people bringing in the beaker pottery. So we've already had a early Neolithic replacement. So now we get another wave of people being replaced. So sort of fairly interesting skew on how we look at migration and people today. We should say that this doesn't actually hold in all other places. Other places it was just a fashion or technology spread, not the people. But here it seemed, largely speaking, the people seem to have been replaced at this period. Coming through more into the Bronze Age, plank-built ships are being used by about 2000 BC, which is just trying to construct them at that period, respect to them. So we know that, we've got plenty of travel going on. Metalworking seems to come to Britain about 2,500 BC, possibly a little bit earlier. By the Middle Bronze Age, there's evidence of scrap metal being traded across the sea because we found the wrecked ships. So, we had a good supply of metal here, especially in the Celtic fringes. For while the Great Orme in Wales was producing a vast amount of metal. So what was it like in the Bronze Age? Well, lately, what was it like? The houses like? We're lucky we've got an equivalent of Pompeii. Must Farm in Cambridgeshire. There's not much really good evidence from a lot of places, but this place has amazing evidence. So these were roundhouses built on stilts over a lake, and they were destroyed in a single burning event. There was about 6 of the houses. Interestingly, they all follow a fairly good pattern, that you've got the door at the southeast with the metalworking nearby, then the weaving, and then kitchen area near, also in the light, and the beds are in the sort of the deep dark corners. And metal wasn't a thing that only some people had. It seems to be each house had multiple axes, a spear, and other metal items. So there was a pretty much standard kit that everyone had. A bit like what, if you go to everyone's house, you'll find knives, you'll find forks. So this is a photo that's been coloured that shows you what's been found. So we've got the blue uprights that are in circles are the supports, and then you've got the yellow are the roof timbers that have come down. The diameter of the roundhouses is about 9 metres. So some of what's been found there, this was a waterlogged site, so we get some really special stuff. This is cloth, very finely woven cloth. So we're not, it was very easy until this sort of stuff came up to think that they might have been wearing something not much more sophisticated than sacking, but this is very fine cloth. And that gives you an idea. That's more cloth, and that's a scale in millimetres across the middle, so very fine weaving managing to go on, and not even just very simple patterns, but there's variation in the weaving across the cloth. And Britain's oldest complete wheel, about 1 metre across. This was a site built over water, but there must have been enough land nearby. So if they had wheels, they must have had, at the very least, either carts or chariots, and probably something to pull them like horses. Might have been human pulled, but I think horses is quite likely. That spearhead is from Melksham. So very sophisticated bronze casting was going on, various techniques. Interestingly, at the time of the farming, you got the field boundaries seem to be on cardinal axes in a grid layout, and there's evidence of that's still in the Aldbourne Downs. And the ploughing didn't seem to respect some of the older long barrows at Avebury. There's definitely sheep farming, and at this point farming is intensifying. They're using more marginal areas. So definitely, farming is intensified around this area. There's evidence for horses on Salisbury Plain, which at the time was mostly grass with a little scrubland, and by the late Bronze Age was pretty much all open, short grazed grassland. At that time down there, they've also found a dog buried complete. Its shoulder height was about 50 centimetres and had a short, broad snout with overcrowded teeth, so about the size of a collie, but maybe with a head a bit more like a rottie or a staffy, which is a somewhat interesting look, but obviously being buried whole, so some respect and care for the animal there. This is an amazing object. This isn't local, but I just had to include it. This is a thing called a bulla, and it's gold and was found in Shropshire recently. That would fit in the palm of your hand, and it's made to be suspended on a cord or something like that. What we have found around Aldbourne is Bronze Age pottery near at Pudley Cottage and Castle Street. So we've still got occupation in the area. So farming continues by about 1600 BC. More evidence of cultivation, stock management. Wheat and barley are known to be here. We know more about the types of fabric that it's being used, linen types, and even a copper sickle. So, again, just because bronze came in didn't mean to say that all tools were bronze. Copper's easier in some ways to create. You only need one metal source, so some things were still being created in copper. So as Bronze Age comes in, we shift from the beaker types of burials to huge circular mounds, Wessex barrow types, from about 2200 BC, sometimes using old Neolithic barrows for their burials. Interestingly, we're seeing a similarity of burial practices on both sides of the channel, so there must still be plenty of contact going on. Our four barrows that we all know, 3 of them they're all from the Silver Age, but 3 are bell barrows. That's got a central mound with a ditch and then a broad berm, and they date from about the early Bronze Age 2000 to 1450 BC. And the 4th one is a bowl barrow. So you tended to get cremation, and then the cremated ashes often being put inside an urn, sometimes inverted, which is odd behaviour. Sometimes you get multiple burials in a barrow. So I mentioned different types of barrow types there. That's the different types of barrow you can get. Obviously, the top 2 are slightly easier to construct. The bottom one, you've got to bring the soil from somewhere else, or maybe you're just doing a light skim. But the top 2, you're just moving soil on a fairly limited area. You can see they have some sort of burial or deposition in the middle. So now we come on to Canon Greenwell. He came to Aldbourne twice in autumn 1878 and autumn 1879. And what he did wasn't much more than plundering, really, in modern terms. He dug the barrows. So we've got a picture of him there on the right. We don't know who the woman is on the left. He wasn't married, so and that's what they found in one of the barrows. So obviously we know that on the slope down towards the Swindon Road from the 4 barrows, you've got another, what is actually 2 barrows, although these days you can only really see it as one. And that's where the Aldbourne cup was found. That's been dated to around 1700 to 1500 BC. He dug most of the barrows that he could find around here. That's a picture from our Heritage Centre. So these are reconstructions. On the right is how you'd see the Aldbourne Cup at the British Museum, and it is on show at the British Museum. on the left is how it might have looked when first created. That's sort of like chalk rubbed into the stippling. Various goods were found there. It was in a pretty poor state, not all pottery, especially when it's not been fired perfectly, survives wonderfully well. There's a curious hole in that cup, so it's not even wonderful for holding stuff. So it's called a cup, but who knows? This is some of the other finds from the barrows. So you can see we're still getting flint arrowheads. So one technology doesn't entirely replace all others. So how many barrows are there around Aldbourne? 4. Well, we know the 4 barrows. 11. Well, they're the scheduled monuments. 12 were dug by Canon Greenwell. Bless him. But that number is not right. So this map is of some desk-based archaeological analysis work done for a proposed development that never happened at Coronel Farm. So they concentrated on that area. That's the large shaded area there. So barrows or ring ditches, and it's one can pretty much count them all as the same thing, because a ploughed out barrow shows as a ring ditch. Count the blue dots there, and I make it at least 22 barrows or ring ditches, and that's not counting the ones that are over at Giant's Grave, so that makes another 4 on top. So there's bound to have been more in other places as well. So at least 26 barrows. And yeah, there's been even a Bronze Age bracelet found on the ridge. And the sort of 4 barrows track ridge. So still occupation. Why were the clusters of these barrows? Is it a boundary? Is it some sort of cemetery of some sorts? Personally, I'd favour boundary as a theory, but we don't really know. And that's another map of barrows. And this is from the Victoria County History. So we see Aldbourne is towards the upper right, and we've got a good scatter of barrows across there. It's not a wonderful photograph, but this is again from the Coronel Farm. You can see across the middle of the photograph lots of circles. Those are ploughed out barrows. So there's a lot more than would have, and they'd have been visible for a long time. They don't go away easily. So the landscape would have been dominated by barrows. Now, this is a reproduction Bronze Age dagger. You can go on a course at the Berrycroft Hub. I really commend it. They're run with James Dilley, and you can cast your own dagger, and then you're left to make your own handle. And this is from when I did that. So I had been going to bring this dagger along to the meeting that this talk would have been a part of. Instead, this is probably going to have to be deposited at the Heritage Centre where you can see it. So it's a bit longer than the blade is a bit longer than your hand. At that time, they'd have probably been using clay moulds. We did it the safe way using sand casting. But you have to get the bronze up to around about 1,000 degrees to be molten, and just managing a pot of 1,000-degree bronze without modern tools is a slightly scary thought. They were probably made by taking the original, forming the mould around it, and then taking the original out and pouring into that. Not every pouring's successful. We managed to demonstrate that. But there you go. It was a fun day out. So Berrycroft Hub, they do all sorts of things. You can cast your own sword if you want. Hopefully once lockdown's over, you can all get down there and have some fun. The daggers like this have been found in barrows, so we know well what they look like. I should just mention as well that if I put a blog together on our website about how to make the handle for this and fit it. At least it's how I did it. There was a bit of trial and error, not all a perfect success, but there we are. About this sort of period, Uffington White Horse was cut. It can be dated by using optical stimulated luminescence. We won't go into quite how that's done, but it dates to about 1400 to 600 BC, and it's Britain's earliest hill figure, and of course isn't very far from here at all. By about 1000 BC, you're getting more changes coming through. We seem to see some monumental middens and black earth sites, so 3 metre deep middens. That's rubbish heaps to you and me. We get more finely crafted pottery, lots of animal bones, so it seems to be possible feasting sites, and these carry on into the Iron Age. Some activity down in Barnes Yard at this sort of period, some pottery. Into the Iron Age, we're still seeing houses are still around. Hill forts are starting to come in. There's somewhat signs of domestic occupation, but not always in the hill forts. Some thought possibly intended as dominating the land. The very name of hill fort is just the first archaeologists in the UK were from a military background, so you give them a ring ditch and they'll think, aha, it's a fort, because the forts are what they know. That doesn't necessarily hold, but unfortunately that's what we've ended up calling them. Iron Age farming, we've got remains of field systems from that period at Coronel Farm. The temperature by about 500 BC had dropped by 2 degrees compared to the Middle Bronze Age. That means that the growing season was much shorter, in a matter of weeks at least. And it caused some upland areas like Dartmoor to be abandoned. At this time, Salisbury Plain is more intensively grazed, so you got the population having to withdraw from the very high, more marginal land down to what would still work. Now this is something else. Who would have ever thought you could have a shield made of bark? This feels like an insane idea, but they found one in Leicestershire. It's stiffened with lathes and had an edge rim. They know it was even painted in a checkerboard pattern, radiocarbon dated to between 395 and 255 BC. It would have been lighter than metal or wood, and that's a reconstruction. And they found very effective. A lot of bounce to it. So going back to hill forts, list of the local ones, we know that Liddington Castle started as an early Iron Age enclosure with low levels of occupation. Nationally, there's about 1,400 known. They start at about 1000 BC and then really proliferate at about 600. Some gain stone ramparts at 400 BC, and then you get some getting extra ditch structures. They call it multi-valley, multiple walls, by about 100 BC. So they're an evolving pattern. So Liddington Castle was excavated in 76. Late Bronze to early Iron Age, and that's one of the soil marks up there. So in the late Iron Age, you're seeing continued intensive use of the landscape, with farming's becoming more and more efficient. We know that coinage is coming in. Around here, you've got the Banjo enclosure up near Chaldean, and the Ridgeway is dating from the very late Iron Age. What the Banjo enclosures are for isn't entirely clear yet. Is it a stock compound? Is it a prestige site? Still research going on that. The Romans described the population as being of near servile level and possessing no initiative, and there's definite proof of there being an aristocratic class. So maybe shape of society is changing. You've got rulers and ruled. I should just mention as well that if I put a blog together on our website about how to make the handle for this and fit it. At least it's how I did it. There was a bit of trial and error, not all a perfect success, but there we are. About this sort of period, Uffington White Horse was cut. It can be dated by using optical stimulated luminescence. We won't go into quite how that's done, but it dates to about 1400 to 600 BC, and it's at Britain's earliest hill figure, and of course isn't very far from here at all. By about 1000 BC, you're getting more changes coming through. We seem to see some monumental middens and black earth sites, so 3 metre deep middens. That's rubbish heaps to you and me. We get more finely crafted pottery, lots of animal bones, so it seems to be possible feasting sites, and these carry on into the Iron Age. Some activity down in Barnes Yard at this sort of period, some pottery. Into the Iron Age, we're still seeing houses are still around. Hill forts are starting to come in. There's somewhat signs of domestic occupation, but not always in the hill forts. Some thought possibly intended as dominating the land. The very name of hill fort is just the first archaeologists in the UK were from a military background, so you give them a ring ditch and they'll think, aha, it's a fort, because the forts are what they know. That doesn't necessarily hold, but unfortunately that's what we've ended up calling them. Iron Age farming, we've got remains of field systems from that period at Coronel Farm. The temperature by about 500 BC had dropped by 2 degrees compared to the Middle Bronze Age. That means that the growing season was much shorter, a matter of weeks at least, and it caused some upland areas like Dartmoor to be abandoned. At this time, Salisbury Plain is more intensively grazed, so you got the population having to withdraw from the very high, more marginal land down to what would still work. Now this is something else. Who would have ever thought you could have a shield made of bark? This feels like an insane idea, but they found one in Leicestershire. It's stiffened with lathes and had an edge rim. They know it was even painted in a checkerboard pattern, radiocarbon dated to between 395 and 255 BC. It would have been lighter than metal or wood, and that's a reconstruction. And they found very effective. A lot of bounce to it. So, going back to hill forts, list of the local ones, we know that Liddington Castle started as an early Iron Age enclosure with low levels of occupation. Nationally, there's about 1,400 known. They start at about 1000 BC and then really proliferate at about 600. Some gain stone ramparts at 400 BC, and then you get some getting extra ditch structures. They call it multi-valley, multiple walls, by about 100 BC. So they're an evolving pattern. So Liddington Castle was excavated in 76. Late Bronze to early Iron Age, and that's one of the soil marks up there. So in the late Iron Age, you're seeing continued intensive use of the landscape, with farming's becoming more and more efficient. We know that coinage is coming in. Around here, you've got the Banjo enclosure up near Chaldean, and the Ridgeway is dating from the very late Iron Age. What the Banjo enclosures are for isn't entirely clear yet. Is it a stock compound? Is it a prestige site? Still research going on that. The Romans described the population as being of near servile level and possessing no initiative, and there's definite proof of there being an aristocratic class. So maybe shape of society is changing. You've got rulers and ruled.